Let's talk about some global ETF adoption. You got Hong Kong this week, and a lot more appears to be starting to create some very interesting domino effects. We'll break it down for you guys. You're going to love it. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into Tech Path. You're on our live stream right now. So the first thing I ask you to do is make sure and hit the like button. Just start with that. And then as we go and you get more information coming into today's episode, hit it again and go from there. I want to thank our sponsor today, and that is Wilder World. You guys, of course, if you know anything about Web3 gaming, this is one of the leading platforms out there in the Web3 gaming ecosystem. They do a tremendous job in terms of innovation. I also think just the creativity that they put behind a lot of what they have going on. They had a huge tournament over at NFT NYC, so some shout outs to some people that were actually involved in that tournament. And the cool thing is they're lining up for a special tournament during Consensus. All of this is going to begin next week as well. So make sure and check it out. They've got a lot happening in the next week or so. They're going to start their Hot Laps tournament season, so this will lead into Consensus. They're going to do weekly Hot Laps, so fastest lap time. They're going to reset that each week. And basically, if you do well, then you're going to get invited to the in real life tournament there at Consensus. So. And by the way, if you guys are not going to be visiting Consensus, it's happening in Austin later in the month of May. I'll be there. So if you are going to go, make sure and say hi if you see me. All right, so let's get into it today. I want to go over to the first few things, and that, of course, is the Kobe EC letter. This week's absolutely wild. Perfect for Wilder World right there. The Fed will react for the first time to rising PCE, PPI, and CPI inflation. And also we get Chair Powell's Q&A after the 2-month increase in inflation since September 23, so that's a big deal. Meanwhile, 20% of the S&P will also be reporting. I'll talk about that in a second in terms of earnings. And then all of this happening before we get the jobs report on Friday. So as you can see, jam-packed with a lot of macro data and critical market and economic data that's going to really guide, I think, the next few months maybe of the markets overall. So definitely going to be one to watch. Don't forget, drop some comments down on the side. We want to get your feedback on what you think is going to happen. And by the way, we have a huge video that we're dropping today that is big about stablecoins, Solana, and a very interesting tale that you guys don't want to miss. So we'll drop it probably maybe an hour or so after this live stream. Check it out if you can. Here's the anticipated earnings releases. Some of these are, I think, very important, and if you look on Monday, maybe not as much, but Tuesday, you've got Amazon in here. You've got a lot of retail product in here, including Coke, Starbucks, McDonald's. Why is retail important? Because this is going to tell us the state of the American consumer. That in itself will bleed into inflation. That'll give us a lot of information. You got MasterCard reporting this week. A lot of food companies reporting, so that'll be a big one. Thursday is a big day because of Apple, Coinbase, DraftKings, quite a bit happening on that day. So as you can see, some pretty key companies that will give, I think, the market a little bit more of indication of how Q1 has performed and how this is going to play out. Because remember, the S&P is one of the key critical components of how crypto markets follow along, including things like Bitcoin. And of course, we've seen a little bit of tragic scenarios that have played out within Bitcoin over the past little bit. Interesting on Friday, and you guys probably follow me on Twitter. If you're not following me on Twitter, do so right now, X, which is at Paul Barron. I put out a tweet about this, I think Friday night, and I was upset because Republic Bank officially collapsed. They were seized by the regulators as typical bank fashion. They do it on a Friday afternoon when nobody's watching. And of course, this is just one of those regional banks that is going to continue to possibly see more bank closures and failures, which is only going to cause more centralization of the banking system. All of that, as you guys know, what happens when that happens, and it's not good. Don't forget, drop some comments over on the side. We're going to get some questions today, try to answer a few for you guys. We may take a look at a little chart or two as well, and then kind of get some insights on this. Another thing here I want to kind of focus in on, crypto funds now just recorded 3 consecutive weeks of outflows for the first time ever. That's a problem. Last 3 weeks, total crypto outflows, 767. Last week alone, 435 of crypto assets were removed from these funds, most since late March. And the majority of outflows were recorded, obviously, in Bitcoin, which saw 423 million of fund withdrawals. Meanwhile, Bitcoin is down 12 in April, but up still on the year at 48%. So that's still a good number on year to date, 48%. I think anybody would like to be in that position. But we're going to see some sideways action. I think everybody's kind of been pointing to this for the last little bit. And the likelihood is, how long is this bull market? Because there's a lot of people that are thinking, hey, if we get too hot too fast, remember, we've gotten pretty hot, are we in a position now where we may see a shorter bull cycle? So this is something that I think a lot of people have been paying attention to. And I want to go to a clip that really goes in and analyzes what the Fed is trying to deal with. Listen in.
It used to be that we were either on one path or the other. We thought they were either going to raise rates at a certain point, and then there was another point where we thought they were going to be cutting rates. Now, like you just said, we don't even know.
Well, they don't even know. That's the reality of it, right? They were so adamant about the fact that they were going to cut. We were looking at the data and saying, look, they've just taken all the fixed income returns from 2024 and pulled them into 2023, and that inflation is going to be stickier, and that's what we're seeing. But this entire sort of journey has shown us that they don't really know what they're going to do. And in terms of volatility, the equity market, I think, have tried to look past that somewhat, these rate expectations, although they're certainly to some extent baked into valuations. But I think they're looking past that and looking to earnings, which are continuing to beat. But also, they didn't need to loosen financial conditions so dramatically late last year to restoke, right, this sort of inflationary bit. And now here we are, and they may have to take
No one's going to let that
aggressive
happen in an election year, Oksana.
And that's really a very important point, because now that the possibility of a June cut is kind of off the table, right, they're not going to move. In the absence of something very, very dramatic happening, they're not moving around the election. And so our next point of action is likely December, and it's really hard to say whether that's going to be a cut.
Oksana, thank you.
Isn't this crazy? You've got the Fed, this time last year, or I should say late last year, Chair Powell started coming in very dovish, saying, hey, we're likely going to do some rate modifications. And then all of a sudden you get whacked with a couple of reports from the inflation continuing to rise. And then all of a sudden it's like every analyst out there has no clue as to where the markets are going to be going. It's just very interesting to me, because this is a time in which I think a lot of people have not necessarily seen, unless maybe you were around in 2008 or all the way back to 1980 where we saw these kind of numbers. But this, I think, is a bit different now, because it is starting to play into, I think, multiple markets, especially with an asset class like crypto. Another thing right now you've got to worry about is breaking for the first time since 1990. Now we have the yen weakening to 160 against the dollar. In other words, the conversion rate for $1 is now gone from 130 yen to 160. Massive change for a major currency, I would agree. Bank of Japan kept interest rates near zero, even as currency was sliding. That was probably the biggest mistake they made. So we have seen a little bit of construction there and trying to rebuild the Japanese markets. Still, the currency has lost near 20% of its purchasing power against the US dollar over the past year. This gets back into the same kind of cycles that we're going to see around the world, especially as we start to see a lot of pressure on the global reserve, the fiat system, the dollar. And this, I think, is just going to be one that we don't necessarily get to walk away from very easily. In fact, here's Powell and Yellen saying, hey, let's do something now, or Japan sells their 1.1 trillion in U.S. bonds. This would inevitably force some pretty heavy quantitative easing. So central banks around the world, I would say, are in a bit of a bind with that for sure. Don't forget, drop some craziness. I'm looking at okay, you guys are going a little crazy. I need some good questions in there. Drop them in over on the sidelines, and we'll get to them the best we can. So we talked about this last week. We kind of anticipated that we were probably going to see a lot more movement in the ETF space, and that's what's happening. Australia now is set to debut a spot Bitcoin ETF. This, of course, will be another major market starting to go into the area. And there's some interesting things that circle around, especially Hong Kong and the Asian markets. And we'll get to that in a second, that could give some directive as to how this market may play out in a little bit. A couple of points. Unnamed sources cited, this is Bloomberg, suggest that applications from Van Eck, Australia, and also Beta shares are likely to be approved. Big deal. And I think this will be just the one of many that will open up a true barrage of both Bitcoin and ETH ETFs. So be on the lookout. A lot definitely happening there. I want to go to a clip real quick. This was one of me talking about this last week, and I think, I'll love to play out. Listen in. Now, I think that we are going to see something different in Hong Kong, and we have a thesis that we're going to paint out for you here. One, of course, is the ability to use Bitcoin inside these funds. Imagine if you had a whole bunch of Bitcoin and you want to go into an ETF. This is one of the features that we do not have currently in ETFs here in the United States. The other thing he talked about was this massive infrastructure that has been building. Remember, we're faced with regulation, pushback, constant hits from DC, all this, FUD that's pushing these markets down. And yet at the same time, you have BlackRock and Fidelity flying, or at least until here recently. But in Hong Kong and in Asia, what we're finding is they've embraced crypto. They've embraced blockchain, meaning maybe they've actually laid the groundwork for a supremely successful launch of both a Bitcoin and an ETF for Ethereum. So be on the lookout, guys. We are going to see some interesting things. All right, so here's Wu Blockchain. This goes into... I think that... Whoops, sorry about that, guys. This goes into a little bit more on the potential success here. Hong Kong ETF issuer confidence around the issuance scale of the currency. Spot ETF for the first day listing tomorrow will exceed the first day of the United States. That would be significant, 125 million. Many investors in Singapore and the Middle East and other places are very interested in crypto. And this is something that we've talked about before, is that there is a big difference here. Let me zoom in on this from Willie Wu right there, because this is a number of crypto users in different regions. So you got Asia, look at that. And then you got North America, basically, right there. So you consider Asia, I would consider possibly some of Europe and possibly some of even Africa to a certain extent. But Asia consistently has been very, very bullish on all things blockchain. And I think this is only going to flow over in their ETF markets. So get ready, guys. I think we are in for a ride going forward here. Now I want to go to another clip here. This is a Glassnode analyst that breaks down Bitcoin's position of where we are in the market, because everybody's asking the same thing. Is this too early for Bitcoin to be up around 60K to 70K? Is it too early? Does that mean we get a shortened cycle? Listen in.
The recovery phase was most of 2023, up until about October. And the way I would describe that, it was only the hodlers. There was no new money coming in. It was only bear market survivors, people who really believe in Bitcoin. They were the primary actors, and they accumulated a huge amount of supply back down there, below 30K kind of levels. Then we had the next phase, which is between about 30K and the all-time high. And I call this the enthusiastic bull. People now believe the bull market is in place. The excitement about the ETFs coming started to pick up. They obviously then went live, and then we very, very quickly went from, 42K all the way up to 70. Now we're kind of at the phase of transitioning between the enthusiastic bull and what I call the euphoric bull. And the euphoric bull is much like 2021. As you break the previous all-time high, a lot of mechanics change. Long-term holders who've been dormant for a long time start to spend. People get more and more excited. The market moves much more violently. You've got a lot more volatility starts to creep in. So these are all the things that we can probably expect moving forward. More long-term holder spending, more people talking about it on the news, which is demand that comes in. And these two forces are always trying to balance each other, and price will rise until supply comes back on the market to satisfy it.
All right, so still bullish overall. I think this is the key when you look at the length of how this bull market might play out. And again, remember, there are a lot of pressures that are coming in, and part of this will be from a competitive nature. We've got Mika launching their situation with stablecoins in the EU. That happens in June. We also have our own stablecoin potentially getting ramped up. You've got a lot of movement in the payment space happening right now. Stripe announced last week. Likelihood is that's going to put some pressure on Visa and many other companies. Then you have the blockchain adoption that's occurring in Europe, whether it's Asia, whether it's Web3 or the innovation that we're seeing around gaming. All of that happening at the same time, guys. So then you have these ETFs rolling in and just starting to dime up. So it's going to get very interesting, I think, moving forward. ETH transactions are dropping, lowest since October 23. And this is interesting. I'll show you something on the chart. But right here, ETH average fee dropped to 112 per network trans. Sentiment also confirms circulating supply reached. Markets mainly reached over the past 6 weeks. Lack of demand and strain on the network may help ETH and associated altcoins around sooner than many of you may expect. So that may be something that maybe this is the right time for Ethereum to bounce, because there's one thing that has started to occur. We're seeing some positive sentiment on Ethereum for the first time in a little bit. So very cool going on that. Let me get a look at the gas chart. Here we go. Yeah. So here's back October 23. Let me see if I can zoom in on that for you guys a little bit. This is October 23. You can see gas dropping down in here to around 7.9. Go back into that for a second. And then you go back out to where we are right now, around 9.30. So are we in a similar alignment here with gas? Because then you had ETH basically starting to skyrocket in terms of fees. Hence, price usually follows along with that. If you go over to the chart, this is that zone right here that they're talking about. And that was a 40% move right there in that period of time. And of course, we know where ETH started to slide into. And then, of course, bam, up to $4,000 over in that last market. So some pretty nice moves, I think, are in alignment for Ethereum. All of that, I think, also in alignment with this current bull run, which is typical of how these things do move. But I'm still a little concerned on the macro side of things. The other thing that plays into this, of course, is the whole situation with ETH as a security. New core filings show that Gensler maybe have believed that ETH was securities for as long as last year. That is a little bit of a news break here from Eleanor Tarrant over at Fox Business. And then she gets further into this, because this is the filing says that ETH 2.0 investigation, it was called, was based on the SEC's belief that the possible offers and sales of certain securities, including but not limited to ETH, had occurred since 2018. So that goes back into some new findings inside this. So could this be the case for this? Now, if Gensler does find Ethereum to be security, it would contradict what the prior SEC guidance was done under Clayton. Remember, Clayton was the previous chair. So lots of situations going on here, that's for sure. And ETH is right in the middle of it. But again, we're still looking at ETH ETFs that will probably be very successful in Hong Kong. This was a clip from Gasparino, and he makes some good points here, but let me play this for you. Let's play it real quick.
On the table here, if the SEC comes out and point blank says it's a security, well, then that's a problem. There's not going to be no ETF for Ethereum. And by the way, a lot of people holding this stuff could probably take a big hit. If it's a commodity, well, then prices are going up and everything is, hunky dory. We should point out that Ellie believes, based on her reporting, that this is probably takes the Ethereum ETF off the table for foreseeable future. People are thinking maybe next month or whatever. It's this is going to be very hard to sort through. One thing that's interesting about these crypto firms that sue the SEC and fight them, they do usually get really good counsel. I mean, Ripple had really good counsel. That's why it won sort of a half-baked victory, and it's still fighting another day. From what I understand, from what Ellie tells me, that Consensus and Ethereum, they've hired Paul Weiss. Now, if you know anything about Paul, so it's not Paul Weiss, not Lathan and Watkins, not Marty Lipton's firm.
Okay.
Wachtell Lipton. So if you know anything about Wachtell Lipton, they are the premier corporate governance, fight firm. Marty Lipton is a legend in corporate lawyering.
Right, so I'll kind of stop it there and pause it for a second, because Gasparino, he got into some squabbles, I think, over Twitter, and just the statement is that ETH is off the table. I don't think this is lost by any means right now, and he's mentioning the attorneys are going to essentially be fighting this. So this is still a very early stage as to whether or not this does become reality, or at least the attempt to try to become reality. The other thing that is really going to happen is that there's just going to be continuous pressure on not only Gensler and the SEC, but I think also on the lawmakers, which is really going to be a big issue. Here was Cochran talking a little bit about this. The SEC approved ETH futures. This was back in October. Many would say, well, there was some pressure on that, but Gensler needs to be under oath explaining why he approved something that he believes was a security under this investigation. So you definitely can't have it both ways, because that's a perfect example. And this is the problem that we're seeing in the crypto army that continues to support what the SEC is doing. Last up here, I'll get into this. This is just the size of the market. 1 billion users by end of 2025. And if you think about that, 65% of those users are going to be holding Bitcoin, likely. So big moves in the markets. Total numbers are going to continue to climb. I think now we've got major adoption happening in the EU. We'll see some major states within the EU countries get into, I think, a very interesting advanced movement of adoption just because of stablecoin regulation over there. And then you've got what's happening in Asia. As I said, these are markets that are competing very heavily against the United States. And let's not forget, you still have BRICS nations basically piling in, trying to align themselves outside the dollar and the fiat system. A lot of things starting to brew into all of this for sure. All right, so let's get to some questions. But before we do that, let's go over to the poll real quick and take a look. How will the Hong Kong Ethereum ETF launch tomorrow? Perform, overperformance, underwhelm, appropriately perform, 36 wins the day. I think it's going to overperform expectations. That was the lowest. So maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right. But we'll see. Bitcoin kind of coming down. We were doing some sentiment analysis this weekend. Still hanging in that zone, so still dropping slightly as Bitcoin holding it around 62 range. ETH up slightly with some sentiment up slightly over the weekend, so not too bad. But Solana is going to be the one I'm watching because there may be another opportunity here on Solana of buying the dip. If we do see that 130 come back in, we'll see how that goes. All right, you guys have a couple of questions. Paul, do you have any ETFs? Are you crazy? Come on. No, I'm going to go own my tokens. And then I'm going to self-custody them. So absolutely not. I'll own securities though. Securities, that's a different game. Powell will have 3 cuts this year. No, that's not going to happen, Jason. I wish it was going to happen, but I just don't see it. There's not enough time. I think there's going to be too much pressure. And if these earnings continue to pull out, the only thing that could happen that could cause this is if we see some meltdowns in some of these other countries that cause this easing that we have to play. In other words, we have lower interest rates, then maybe that comes in. And if earnings continue to possibly come in, oh, I shouldn't say continue, if earnings do come in slight, meaning we start to see the S&P continue to trace down. Where's the S&P right now? Let's take a look at the Monday on the S&P. Yeah, so it's kind of recovered. It bounced a little bit off of 49.65, came up last week, holding today at 5,100. Still down from, this top around 52, 53, but that'll be a good one. What would you vote? I voted on the poll, so yeah, I think it's going to overperform. I think all of this FUD will still stifle any movement for now. I would agree this is kind of a slow time of year. The only thing that would play into that is if we see a fracture in the Fed's conviction toward holding rates for longer. If they come out and even hint that they think that we are going to get a rate cut in, then that could change things quickly. So be on the lookout for that. Dave says, good luck, Asia. We're cheering for you. Yeah, I agree. Here we go. We all know what U.S. ETFs did. Asia's going to buy even more because of the competition. Yeah, there's more people. Well, I think more people in terms of that are savvy to this market. So that, and I think also a lot more bigger bags in Asia in terms of the people that are looking to buy. That's a big advantage of it. And then you have that pound, kind of that dog pile effect where we're going to see a lot of other countries kind of try to figure out how do they get involved in this. And then you get what's happening in the EU. So all good. That's all good stuff, actually, in reality. Not good for the United States, though, around stable coins, which we'll have a video on that. So make sure and check it out. All right. If you're not following us over on Twitter or X, my name is @PaulBaron, so you can follow me over there. If you're brand new to the channel, what I ask you to do is hit the like button right now. We do these kinds of live streams. And if you subscribe, you're going to get a notification, and it's going to let you know when these things come out. And in many cases, I wish there was more ways that we could do more notifications on YouTube, but you can only get so many of these a day. With everything happening so fast, this week is going to be crazy, and I think we're going to see some volatility in the market. So be on the lookout for all that. Make sure and jump into the Diamond Circle, and we'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.